What Harold Bess thought was just his stubborn pig digging in the dirt was actually the most extraordinary act of animal loyalty ever documented as his prize Hampshire sow. Rosie had been systematically excavating the exact location where his late wife Martha had buried their life savings of $847,000 in gold coins 3 days before her sudden death from a heart attack. Coins that Harold had searched for desperately during 2 years of near bankruptcy, never realizing that his most beloved pig had been trying to save his farm and his future by leading him to the treasure that would change everything. The discovery would transform not only Harold's understanding of animal intelligence and devotion, but would rewrite scientific knowledge about pig cognition and memory, while revealing a love story between a man, his wife, and an extraordinary animal that had been unfolding in plain sight in the small farming community of Cedar Hollow, Iowa, population 1,247. Before we dive into this incredible story of loyalty, loss, and the most intelligent pig you've never heard of, tell us in the comments, what's the most amazing thing you've ever seen an animal do? And if stories about the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've got an even more unbelievable tale of a dog that saved an entire town from disaster. To understand how a pig became the most loyal friend a man could ever have, we need to go back to where it all started. Crisp October morning in 2021, when Harold Bess, and 50 years old, and still happily married to his childhood sweetheart, Martha, first laid eyes on the piglet that would change his life forever. Harold and Martha Bess had been running Bess Family Farm for 26 years, transforming 240 acres of rolling Iowa farmland into one of the most respected livestock operations in Cedar County. Their specialty was heritage breed pigs, Hampshire, Yorkshire, and Duroc varieties that commanded premium prices from high-end restaurants and specialty meat markets throughout the Midwest. It wasn't just a business for them, it was a calling that connected them to the land, to each other, and to a way of life that had sustained rural Iowa communities for generations. Cedar Hollow, Iowa, sat nestled in a valley between gentle hills covered with oak and maple trees that painted the landscape in brilliant reds and golds every autumn. The community had been founded in 1887 by German and Irish immigrants who had been drawn by cheap land and the promise of agricultural prosperity. Unlike many rural Iowa towns that had struggled with population decline and economic challenges, Cedar Hollow had managed to maintain its character and viability through a combination of agricultural innovation, community cooperation, and the kind of stubborn Midwestern determination that refused to give up on the place they called home. The town's main street stretched for exactly 4 blocks, lined with buildings that told the story of American small-town resilience. Murphy's General Store anchored the business district with its original tin ceiling and wooden floors that creaked with authority, serving as both retail establishment and unofficial community center where farmers gathered to discuss weather, crop prices, and local news. The Cedar Hollow State Bank, established in 1923 and still family-owned, occupied the corner building with its impressive limestone facade and hand-painted signs that had been touched up every few years but never replaced. O'Sullivan's Feed and Supply took up most of the 3rd block, loading docks and grain silos serving farming operations within a 30-mile radius. The building buzzed with activity during planting and harvest seasons as farmers lined up to purchase seed, fertilizer, and equipment while sharing information about market conditions and agricultural techniques that could make the difference. Between profitable and unprofitable seasons, the 4th block housed Kalchik's Tavern, which had been serving the community since Prohibition ended and had become the social center where farming families celebrated good harvests, commiserated over weather disasters, and maintained the informal networks that held rural communities together through good times and bad. The tavern's walls were covered with photographs documenting Cedar Hollow's agricultural history, including images of prize-winning livestock, record-breaking harvests, and community celebrations that stretched back nearly a century. Harold and Walt Ness. Martha had met at a 4-H livestock show when they were both 14 years old. Competing against each other in the swine competition with Hampshire pigs they had raised from birth, Harold's pig had won first place, but Martha's had one grand champion. And Harold had been so impressed by her knowledge and passion for animal husbandry that he had spent the entire county fair following her around, asking questions about breeding, techniques and feed management strategies that impressed Martha with their sophistication and genuine interest. Their courtship had continued through high school, where they had both participated in Future Farmers of America and had collaborated on agricultural projects that showcased their shared commitment to farming excellence and innovation. After graduation, Harold had attended Iowa State University to study animal science, while Martha had pursued agricultural education. And they had married the weekend after graduation, in a ceremony held in the same Methodist church where both their families had worshipped for generations. The early years of their marriage had been challenging but rewarding, as they had worked to establish their farming operation while learning the complex business and technical skills required for success in modern agriculture. They had started with a small herd of Hampshire pigs, purchased with money borrowed from both sets of parents, and they had gradually expanded their operation through careful reinvestment of profits and strategic borrowing that allowed them to purchase additional land and equipment as opportunities arose. Martha had been the business brains of the operation, managing finances, marketing, customer relationships with the kind of attention to detail and customer service that had built their reputation throughout the region she had established. Relationships with restaurant owners and specialty meat retailers who valued the quality and consistency of their products, creating a premium market that allowed them to charge prices that made their operation profitable even when commodity markets were struggling. Harold had focused on the technical aspects of livestock management, developing expertise in animal nutrition, breeding programs, health management that had enabled them to achieve productivity levels that impressed agricultural extension agents and university researchers. His pigs consistently scored well in competition, and his breeding program had produced animals that other farmers sought out for improving their own herds. But it was Martha who had insisted they needed a mascot pig, one special animal that would represent the heart and soul of their operation, while also serving as a conversation started with visitors and customers who toured their farm. She had researched Hampshire bloodlines for months, corresponding with breeders throughout the Midwest and studying pedigrees with the intensity of someone preparing for a doctoral dissertation. On that October morning in 2021, Martha had driven 340 miles to a heritage pig farm near Albert Lea, Minnesota, to pick up a 6-week-old Hampshire piglet that had been specifically selected for its perfect conformation, excellent bloodlines, and what the breeder had described as unusual intelligence and personality that made it stand out from its littermates. The piglet, that would become known as Rosie, had been the smallest of a litter of 9, but she had also been the most curious and interactive, approaching visitors fearlessly and demonstrating problem-solving abilities that impressed experienced pig breeders who had seen thousands of animals over decades of breeding operations. The breeder, an elderly Norwegian farmer named Sven Eriksson, had warned Martha that this particular piglet was different in ways that might make her either the best pig they ever owned or the most challenging. She watches everything, Eriksson had explained as he loaded the piglet into Martha's trailer. It's not like other pigs who are mainly interested in food and comfort. This one studies things like she's trying to understand how everything works. My grandfather, who farmed in Norway before coming to America, used to say that some pigs are born with old souls, and this little one definitely has that quality. Martha had been charmed by Eriksson's old-world wisdom and his obvious affection for the animals he bred, but she had dismissed his mystical talk about old souls as the romantic notions of an elderly farmer who had spent too many years alone with his livestock. She was interested in the piglet's genetic potential and its value as a breeding animal and farm ambassador, not in supernatural theories about animal consciousness and intelligence. The drive back to Cedar Hollow had taken 6 hours, with Martha stopping every 2 hours to check on the piglet and offer water and small amounts of feed. During these stops, she had noticed that the piglet seemed unusually attentive to her voice and movements, watching her with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to track her activities with interest rather than the simple, hunger-driven focus that characterized most young pigs. When Martha had arrived home that evening, Harold had been waiting in the barnyard with a specially prepared pen that included fresh bedding, heat lamps for warmth, and feeding equipment sized for a young pig. They had discussed names during dinner, eventually settling on Rosie because of the piglet's pink coloring and Martha's fondness for her grandmother Rose, who had been known throughout their community for her kindness, intelligence, and fierce loyalty to family and friends. From her first day on Bess family farm, Rosie had displayed behaviors that distinguished her from every other pig Harold and Martha had ever owned. She had learned her name within 3 days, responding consistently when called and coming when whistled too, in a way that impressed visitors who had never seen pigs demonstrate such responsiveness to human communication. She had mastered the farm's feeding schedule within a week, positioning herself at the gate of her pen at precisely the correct times without needing to be called or prompted. Most remarkably, Rosie had seemed to understand and respect boundaries in ways that allowed her unusual freedom around the farm. Unlike other pigs, who required constant supervision and secure fencing to prevent them from wandering into areas where they could cause damage or create safety hazards, Rosie could be trusted to stay within designated areas and return to her pen when called, even when no barriers prevented her from roaming freely. Martha had been delighted by Rosie's intelligence and personality, spending hours each day interacting with her and teaching her simple tricks that demonstrated her learning abilities and eagerness to please. Rosie learned to sit, stay, and come when called, to navigate obstacle courses that Martha constructed, and even to differentiate between different buckets and feeding stations based on colored markers that Martha had installed. Harold had been more skeptical of Rosie's apparent intelligence, attributing her behaviors to good training and natural pig instincts rather than exceptional cognitive abilities. But even he had been impressed by her problem-solving skills and her ability to adapt to new situations with ease and confidence that seemed remarkable for any livestock animal. The farm itself was a testament to Harold and Martha's commitment to both agricultural excellence and environmental stewardship. The 240-acre operation was divided into carefully managed pastures, crop fields, and woodland areas that provided natural habitat for wildlife while supporting sustainable farming practices that protected soil and water quality for future generations. The main farmhouse, built in 1923 by the farm's original owners, was a 2-story white clapboard structure with a wraparound porch that provided views of the entire operation. Martha had spent years restoring the home's original character while adding modern conveniences that made it comfortable for contemporary living. The kitchen featured original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures combined with modern appliances, and storage systems that reflected Martha's love of cooking and entertaining. The heart of the farming operation was centered around a complex of buildings that included the main livestock barn, feed storage facilities, equipment sheds, and specialized structures for different aspects of their pig breeding and raising program. The main barn was a magnificent structure built from native limestone and oak timber with soaring ceilings, natural ventilation systems, and interior spaces designed to provide optimal comfort and health for their livestock. Harold had spent years perfecting the barn's layout and equipment to maximize efficiency while minimizing stress on the animals. Each pen was sized to provide adequate space for movement and comfort, with access to both indoor shelter and outdoor runs that allowed the pigs to express natural behaviors like rooting, wallowing, and socializing. The feeding systems were designed to provide consistent nutrition while minimizing waste and competition between animals. The farm's reputation had been built through decades of consistent quality and innovation that had earned the respect of customers, competitors, and agricultural professionals throughout Iowa and beyond. Their Hampshire pigs were particularly prized for their excellent conformation, superior meat quality, and gentle temperaments that made them ideal for both breeding programs and direct meat sales to discerning customers. Martha had developed relationships with over 30 restaurants and specialty meat retailers who specifically requested Bess family farm products because of their consistent quality and the story behind their production. She had created marketing materials that explained their farming practices, animal welfare standards, and family history in ways that connected customers to the land and the people who produced their food. Harold's breeding program had produced champion animals that had won numerous awards at county and state fairs, establishing Bess Family Farm as one of the premier Hampshire pig operations in the Midwest. His attention to genetics, nutrition, and animal husbandry had resulted in pigs that consistently outperformed industry standards for growth rates, feed conversion efficiency, and meat quality characteristics that commanded premium prices in specialty markets. As Rosie grew from a curious piglet into a magnificent 400-pound Hampshire sow, her special status on the farm became even more pronounced. Unlike the other pigs, who were part of the commercial breeding and meat production operation, Rosie served as the farm's official ambassador and mascot, greeting visitors, participating in educational tours, and representing the farm at county fairs and agricultural exhibitions. Martha had trained Rosie to perform in educational demonstrations that showcased pig intelligence and the importance of proper animal husbandry practices. Rosie could navigate complex obstacle courses, respond to voice commands, and interact with visitors in ways that challenged common misconceptions about pig intelligence and behavior. These demonstrations had become popular attractions at county fairs and agricultural events, helping to promote both Bess Family Farm and the broader principles of sustainable agriculture and animal welfare. Harold had initially been skeptical of Martha's plans to use Rosie as an educational ambassador. He was worried that anthropomorphizing their livestock might interfere with the practical realities of running a commercial farming operation. But he had been won over by the positive responses from visitors and customers, who were impressed by Rosie's abilities and the obvious care and respect that the Bess family showed for their animals. Rosie's living arrangements reflected her special status on the farm. While the commercial pigs lived in the main barn with access to outdoor runs, Rosie had her own specially designed pen near the farmhouse that provided her with additional space, comfort features, and proximity to the family's daily activities. Her pen included a custom-built shelter with heating and cooling systems, a mud wallow for temperature regulation and skin care, and feeding stations that allowed Martha to provide specialized nutrition designed to maintain Rosie's health and optimal condition. More importantly, Rosie had earned the privilege of supervised free-range time around the farmyard, where she could explore, interact with other farm animals, and satisfy her curiosity about the world beyond her pen. These periods of freedom were carefully monitored to ensure her safety and prevent damage to crops or equipment. But they provided Rosie with mental stimulation and physical exercise that contributed to her obvious contentment and well-being. Martha had documented Rosie's growth and development through thousands of photographs and detailed records that tracked her health, behavior, and learning achievements. These records had attracted the attention of animal behavior researchers from Iowa State University, who had visited the farm to observe Rosie and discuss the potential for collaborative research projects that could advance scientific understanding of pig cognition and intelligence. The relationship between Martha and Rosie had developed into something that transcended typical farmer livestock interactions and approached the kind of interspecies bond that researchers were only beginning to understand and appreciate. Martha spent hours each day with Rosie, not just for feeding and care activities, but for what could only be described as social interaction and companionship that provided mutual satisfaction and emotional support. Rosie seemed to understand Martha's moods and emotional states in ways that allowed her to provide comfort during stressful periods and share excitement during happy occasions. When Martha was worried about farm finances or market conditions, Rosie would stay close to her, providing physical contact and gentle vocalizations that seemed designed to offer reassurance and support. When Martha was celebrating successes or enjoying pleasant activities, Rosie would become more playful and energetic, reflecting and amplifying Martha's positive emotions. Martha had confided to Harold that she sometimes felt Rosie understood her better than most humans, and that spending time with Rosie provided a kind of peace and perspective that helped her manage the stresses and challenges of running a complex farming operation. Harold had witnessed these interactions countless times and had to admit that the relationship between his wife and their pig was unlike anything he had ever seen between humans and livestock animals. The daily routine that developed between Martha and Rosie became one of the most predictable and cherished aspects of farm life. Every morning at 6:30 a.m., immediately after Harold left for his first round of livestock feeding, Martha would visit Rosie's pen with a cup of coffee and whatever breakfast treats she had prepared for her special pig. These morning visits lasted 30 to 45 minutes and included not just feeding, but conversation, gentle grooming, and what observers could only describe as quality time spent together. Evening visits followed a similar pattern, with Martha returning to Rosie's pen after dinner to share the day's events, provide evening treats, and ensure that Rosie was comfortable and content before retiring for the night. These evening sessions often lasted an hour or more, especially during pleasant weather, when Martha would sit on a bench Harold had built beside Rosie's pen and simply enjoyed the companionship of her favorite animal. Harold had initially been amused by Martha's devotion to Rosie, but over time he had come to appreciate the genuine bond between them and the obvious benefits that the relationship provided for both his wife and their remarkable pig. Martha seemed more relaxed and happy when she spent time with Rosie, and Rosie obviously thrived under Martha's attention and care, maintaining excellent health and displaying behaviors that impressed everyone who met her. Nor Martha fully understood during those happy years was that Martha had been experiencing intermittent heart palpitations and chest discomfort that she had been hiding from her husband out of concern that knowledge of her health problems would worry him unnecessarily and might interfere with his ability to focus on the demanding work of running their farming operation. Martha had always been the type of person who preferred to handle problems privately rather than burden others with concerns that might not develop into serious issues. Her family had a history of heart problems, and she had been monitoring her symptoms carefully while hoping that lifestyle changes and stress reduction might resolve the issues without requiring medical intervention or major changes to their life together. The symptoms had begun during the stressful period in early 2022, when rising feed costs and supply chain disruptions had threatened the profitability of their operation and had forced them to make difficult decisions about herd size, capital investments, and financial management strategies. Martha had attributed her physical symptoms to stress and had focused on managing the business challenges while hoping that her health concerns would resolve naturally once their financial situation stabilized. But by early 2023, Martha's symptoms had worsened to the point where she could no longer ignore them or dismiss them as stress-related inconveniences. She had begun experiencing episodes of shortness of breath, chest tightness, and irregular heartbeat that lasted for several minutes and left her feeling weak and frightened. Most concerning were episodes that occurred during physical activity or emotional stress, suggesting that her heart was struggling to meet the demands of her active lifestyle. Martha had secretly scheduled medical appointments with Dr. Rebecca Chen, cardiologist in Cedar Rapids, who specialized in treating rural patients who often delayed seeking medical care due to geographic challenges and concerns about leaving their farming operations unattended. Dr. Chen's examinations had revealed significant cardiac abnormalities that required immediate attention and long-term management strategies that might significantly alter Martha's lifestyle and capabilities. The diagnosis had been devastating, but not entirely unexpected. Martha was experiencing severe coronary artery disease that had progressed to the point where major intervention would be required to prevent potentially fatal heart attacks. The condition was treatable through surgical procedures and medication management, but it would require significant lifestyle changes and ongoing medical supervision that would affect every aspect of her life and her relationship with Harold. Dr. Chen had strongly recommended immediate surgical intervention to address Martha's coronary artery blockages, followed by comprehensive lifestyle modifications and medication management that would require regular monitoring and potential adjustments. Based on her response to treatment, the procedures themselves carried significant risks. The recovery period would require months of limited activity that would make it impossible for Martha to maintain her usual role in managing their farming operation. Martha had been overwhelmed by the implications of her diagnosis and the potential impacts on Harold and their life together. She had spent 26 years as Harold's equal partner in every aspect of their farming operation, and the prospect of becoming dependent on his care while being unable to contribute to their shared work had been emotionally devastating. More frightening was the possibility that her condition might deteriorate rapidly. leaving Harold alone to manage both their farming operation and her medical care. The financial implications of her medical treatment had been equally concerning. While their farm insurance provided some coverage for medical expenses, the costs of cardiac surgery, rehabilitation, and ongoing care would strain their resources and might require them to borrow against their farm equity or consider selling assets that represented decades of hard work and careful investment. Most painful for Martha had been the realization that her illness might force them to scale back or even sell their farming operation at a time when Harold was still passionate about their work and looking forward to many more years of agricultural success and innovation. The farm represented everything they had built together, and the possibility that her health problems might destroy Harold's dreams and life work had been almost unbearable. Martha had requested time to consider her treatment options and discuss the situation with Harold, but Dr. Chen had emphasized that delay could be dangerous and that her condition was likely to continue deteriorating without intervention. The doctor had agreed to provide Martha with detailed information about her options and had scheduled follow-up appointments to monitor her condition, but had made it clear that significant decisions would need to be made within weeks rather than months. During the agonizing weeks following her diagnosis, Martha had struggled with how to share the news with Harold in a way that would prepare him for the challenges ahead, while minimizing the emotional impact of learning about her serious health problems. She had spent countless hours considering various approaches to the conversation, but had consistently postponed the discussion due to concerns about timing and Harold's emotional readiness to handle such devastating news. As Martha wrestled with her diagnosis and its implications, she had also been grappling with a growing concern about their financial vulnerability that extended beyond her medical expenses. The farming operation's success had been built through years of reinvestment in land, equipment, and infrastructure improvements that had created substantial equity, but had also left them with limited liquid assets that could be easily accessed during emergencies. Their wealth was tied up in farmland, livestock, equipment, and facilities that could potentially be sold if necessary. But such sales would take time to arrange and might not provide fair value if they were forced to sell quickly due to financial pressures. Martha had begun to worry that a combination of her medical expenses and potential income loss during her treatment and recovery might create a financial crisis that could threaten their ability to maintain the farm and their way of life. These concerns had been amplified by conversations with other farming families who had faced similar medical and financial challenges and had been forced to make painful decisions about asset sales, debt management, and lifestyle changes that had fundamentally altered their lives and their relationships with their land and their work. Martha had witnessed families who had lost their farms due to medical bankruptcies, and she was determined to protect Harold and their operation from such devastating consequences. During her research into financial planning and asset protection strategies, Martha had learned about wealthy individuals who maintained significant holdings of gold coins and precious metals as insurance against economic uncertainty and financial emergencies. The concept had appealed to her as a way to convert some of their farm equity into a more liquid and secure form of wealth that could be accessed quickly if needed. Without requiring complex asset sales or borrowing arrangements, Martha had begun discreetly liquidating some of their financial investments and converting the proceeds into gold coins that could be stored securely on their property and accessed immediately if their situation became desperate. She had researched reputable precious metals dealers and had made several carefully planned trips to purchase American Eagle gold coins, Canadian maple leafs, and other internationally recognized gold pieces that would retain their value and could be easily converted to cash if necessary. The process had taken several months and had required Martha to manage the transactions carefully to avoid raising questions from Harold or creating documentation that might complicate their tax situations or create security risks. She had used cash withdrawals from their business accounts to fund the purchases, timing the transactions to coincide with normal business expenses and seasonal cash flow patterns that would make the expenditures less noticeable. By early autumn of 2023, Martha had accumulated $847,000 worth of gold coins that represented a significant portion of their liquid assets and provided her with a sense of security about their ability to weather financial emergencies related to her health problems or other unforeseen challenges. The coins were stored in specially designed containers that protected them from moisture and physical damage while allowing for easy transport and concealment if security concerns required. Relocating the collection, Martha's decision about where to hide their gold reserves had been influenced by her intimate knowledge of their farm property and her understanding of the security and practical considerations that would protect their wealth while ensuring that Harold could access it if something happened to her before she had the opportunity to share her medical diagnosis and their financial preparations. She had considered various storage options, including bank safety deposit boxes, home safes, and commercial storage facilities. But it ultimately decided that their farm property provided the most secure and accessible location for concealing assets that might need to be retrieved quickly during emergencies. Bank storage would require documentation and access procedures that might be complicated during medical emergencies, while commercial facilities might not be available during economic disruptions or could potentially be compromised by criminal activity. The location Martha had chosen for burying their gold was behind their main barn, in an area that was not visible from roads or neighboring properties, but was easily accessible from the farmhouse and main farm buildings. The spot was marked by natural landmarks that would make it easy to locate, but was not in an area that would be disturbed by normal farming activities or seasonal maintenance projects. Most importantly, the location was in an area where Rosie frequently spent time during her supervised free-range periods, and Martha had noticed that Rosie seemed particularly interested in that specific area, often rooting and exploring in ways that suggested she found something appealing about the soil conditions or the natural features of the location. Martha had been deeply moved by Rosie's apparent interest in the area where she planned to hide their treasure, interpreting the pig's behavior as a positive sign that the location was appropriate and secure. She had even begun to think of Rosie as a kind of guardian for their secret, though she had never seriously considered that the intelligent pig might actually understand what she was doing or remember the significance of the location. On November 17th, 2023, 3 days before her sudden death from a massive heart attack, Martha had waited until Harold was in town purchasing winter supplies, and had spent the afternoon carefully burying their gold collection in a waterproof container 3 feet below ground in the exact spot where Rosie had been showing so much interest during recent weeks. The burial had been physically challenging for Martha, given her deteriorating cardiac condition, but she had been determined to complete the task while she still had the strength and opportunity to do so without Harold's knowledge. She had taken great care to restore the surface appearance of the area so that there were no obvious signs of disturbance, and she had planned to create a detailed map and instructions for Harold that would guide him to the treasure when she was ready to reveal her medical diagnosis and their financial preparations. Martha had intended to have the conversation with Harold the following week, after she had recovered from the physical exertion of hiding their gold and had prepared the documentation and explanations that would help Harold understand her decisions and their options for moving forward together. She had even purchased a beautiful wooden box where she planned to store maps, instructions, and personal letters that would provide Harold with both practical guidance and emotional support for the challenges ahead. But Martha never had the opportunity to share her secrets. On November 20th, 2023, while Harold was repairing equipment in the machine shop, Martha had suffered a massive heart attack while visiting with Rosie in her pen. Harold had found her there 20 minutes later, lying peacefully beside the pig, who had been her closest companion and confidant, with Rosie standing guard over her body with obvious distress and confusion about why her beloved human was no longer responding to her presence. Harold's grief over Martha's sudden death had been compounded by the complete shock of losing the person who had been his partner, best friend, and co-manager of every aspect of their life together. Martha's death had not just been an emotional catastrophe, it had also created immediate practical challenges about managing their farming operation, their finances, and their future without the person who had handled most of their business management and financial planning. In the weeks following Martha's funeral, Harold had begun the overwhelming process of understanding their financial situation and making decisions about the future of their farming operation. Martha had always handled their bookkeeping, tax preparation, and financial planning, and Harold had discovered that he was largely unprepared to manage the complex business and administrative aspects of their operation without her guidance and expertise. The discovery that Martha had been liquidating their financial investments during the months before her death had been puzzling and concerning for Harold, who couldn't understand why she would have made such significant financial decisions without discussing them with him. The missing money represented a substantial portion of their liquid assets, and Harold had spent months searching through Martha's papers and records, trying to understand what had happened to their savings. Harold had initially assumed that Martha had made investments or purchases that she had planned to discuss with him but had never had the opportunity to explain before her sudden death. He had contacted their accountant, their bank, their financial advisor seeking information about Martha's transactions. But none of these professionals had been able to provide explanations that accounted for all of the missing funds. Search for their missing money had become an obsession for Harold, who had systematically examined every aspect of their financial records and had even hired a forensic accountant to analyze their transactions and identify any irregularities or unauthorized activities that might explain the disappearance of such a significant amount of money. The investigation had revealed Martha's gold purchases, but had not provided any clues about what she had done with the coins, or why she had chosen to convert their assets without discussing her plans. Harold had searched every possible hiding place on their property, including the farmhouse, the barn, equipment sheds, and even areas of their farmland where Martha might have concealed valuable items. He had used metal detectors and carefully examined their buildings for hidden safes or concealment areas, and had even consulted with security experts about potential hiding places that might have appealed to someone trying to protect valuable assets. The search had been emotionally exhausting and financially expensive, requiring Harold to invest time and resources that he could ill afford while trying to maintain their farming operation and manage his grief over Martha's loss. After nearly 2 years of searching, Harold had begun to accept that the money might have been lost or stolen, though he had never been able to understand how such a theft could have occurred without leaving evidence, or how Martha could have been deceived by criminals sophisticated enough to steal such a large amount without detection. Throughout Harold's desperate search for their missing money, Rosie had been displaying behavior that Harold had initially attributed to grief over Martha's death and adjustment difficulties related to the changes in their daily routines and the emotional atmosphere around the farm. Pigs were known to be intelligent and emotionally sensitive animals, and Harold had assumed that Rosie was responding to the loss of her favorite human and the obvious stress that Harold was experiencing. But Rosie's behavior had been more specific and persistent than simple grief or general anxiety. Beginning approximately 2 weeks after Martha's death, Rosie had started spending extended periods in the area behind the barn where Martha had buried their gold, digging methodically in a specific 3-foot diameter area with the kind of focused determination that suggested she was searching for something specific rather than simply expressing random digging behaviors. Harold had initially tried to discourage Rosie's digging, worried that she might be damaging drainage systems or underground utilities that could create problems for their farming operation. He had filled in her holes several times and had attempted to redirect her attention to other areas of the farm where her digging would be less problematic. But Rosie had consistently returned to the same spot and had resumed her excavation activities with even greater intensity. The persistence of Rosie's behavior had eventually convinced Harold to allow her to continue digging, partly because he had been too overwhelmed by other challenges to invest energy in managing her activities, and partly because he had begun to wonder if her behavior might be related to something significant that he didn't understand. Martha had always insisted that Rosie was unusually intelligent, and Harold had started to consider the possibility that the pig's behavior was purposeful, rather than random. Rosie's digging schedule had become remarkably consistent and predictable. Every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., she would lumber to the same spot behind the barn and would dig methodically for exactly 23 minutes before returning to her pen for breakfast. Every evening at 5:15 p.m., she would repeat the ritual with identical timing and duration, creating a routine that was as precise as any farm task that Harold managed. The precision of Rosie's schedule had been particularly puzzling for Harold, who understood animal behavior well enough to recognize that such consistency suggested strong motivation and clear objectives rather than casual or instinctive digging. Behavior. Pigs were naturally inclined to root and dig, but Rosie's activities were far more focused and systematic than normal pig behavior, and her consistency suggested that she was working toward a specific goal rather than simply satisfying natural urges. Harold had consulted with veterinarians and animal behavior specialists about Rosie's digging behavior, seeking explanations that might help him understand what was motivating her activities and whether her behavior indicated health problems or psychological issues that required intervention. The experts had generally attributed her behavior to grief, stress, or boredom, and had recommended environmental enrichment and increased social interaction that might redirect her energy toward more appropriate activities. But none of the recommended interventions had affected Rosie's digging behavior. She had continued her morning and evening excavation sessions with unwavering dedication, gradually creating a hole that was approximately 3 feet in diameter and had reached a depth of nearly 2 feet after 6 months of consistent work. Harold had been impressed by Rosie's persistence and had begun to admire her determination. Even though he couldn't understand what she was trying to accomplish, as Harold would later realize, Rosie had been trying to help him all along. She had been the only witness to Martha's secret burial of their gold treasure, and she had been working systematically to excavate the exact location where their missing money was hidden, trying to lead Harold to the discovery that would solve his financial problems and reveal Martha's final loving gift to their future together. But Harold thought she was just being a pig. He had no idea she was trying to make him rich. And on this particular October morning in 2024, as Harold began what he expected to be another routine day of harvesting corn and managing his struggling farming operation, Rosie was about to succeed in her year-long mission to reunite Harold with the treasure that Martha had hidden to protect their future, treasure that would prove once and for all that love truly knows no boundaries. That intelligence comes in forms we rarely recognize, and that sometimes the answers we're desperately seeking are literally right under our noses, if we just know how to listen to those who cannot speak but refuse to give up on us. To understand the earthquake that Rosie's discovery would cause in Cedar Hollow, you need to understand what kind of man Harold Bess had become in the 2 years following Martha's death. More importantly, how the tight-knit farming community had rallied around him with the fierce protectiveness that rural Iowa reserves for neighbors who are fighting to save everything they've built while grieving losses that would break most people. Cedar Hollow, Iowa, wasn't just any declining agricultural community struggling with the economic realities of modern farming. It was a place where people knew each other's stories going back for generations, where tragedy was met with casseroles and volunteer labor, and where Harold Bess had transformed from a successful farmer with a beloved wife into a symbol of quiet determination and heartbreaking resilience that the entire community had come to respect, protect, and support through their collective concern and practical assistance. By October 2024, Harold Bess was 52 years old and had been a widower for nearly 11 months, though the grief lines around his eyes and the way he carried himself suggested a man who had aged a decade in the span of a single devastating year. The Harold that Cedar Hollow residents encountered daily was a fundamentally different person than the confident, jovial farmer who had worked alongside his beloved Martha for 26 years, building one of the most respected livestock operations. In eastern Iowa, the transformation had been gradual but unmistakable. Where Harold had once been the farmer who would spend 30 minutes at Murphy's General Store discussing weather patterns, market trends, and community news with whoever happened to be there, he had become a man who completed his transactions efficiently and politely, but without the easy conversation and genuine interest in others. Lives that had made him a valued member of the community's informal social network. Martha had been the social coordinator of their partnership, the one who remembered birthdays, organized holiday gatherings, and maintained the relationships with neighbors, customers, and extended family members that had made Bess Family Farm a central part of Cedar Hollow's agricultural and social community. Without her, Harold had struggled to maintain connections that had seemed natural and effortless when Martha was alive to facilitate and encourage his social interactions. The change was most evident during community gatherings and social events that Harold continued to attend out of obligation and respect for tradition, but where his discomfort and sadness were obvious to everyone who remembered the animated, engaged man he had been when Martha was by his side. At church services, Harold would arrive precisely on time, sit in the same pew he and Martha had occupied for 26 years, participate respectfully in the service, and leave immediately afterward without the socializing and conversation that had once extended these gatherings for hours. During community meetings about agricultural issues, road maintenance, or local government matters, Harold would contribute when his expertise was needed and would vote responsibly on issues affecting the community. But he no longer volunteered for committees or leadership roles that would require sustained interaction with neighbors who meant well but whose sympathy and concern served as constant reminders of everything he had lost. The practical challenges of managing Bess Family Farm without Martha had proven to be even more overwhelming than Harold had anticipated. Martha had handled virtually all of the business and administrative aspects of their operation, including financial management, customer relationships, marketing strategies, and regulatory compliance requirements that were essential for maintaining their reputation and profitability in an increasingly complex agricultural marketplace. Harold possessed exceptional technical knowledge about animal husbandry, breeding programs, and the practical aspects of livestock production. But he had limited experience with the business skills that were required for financial planning, market analysis, and customer service that Martha had managed with apparent ease. The learning curve had been steep and frustrating, requiring Harold to master complex software systems, accounting procedures, and relationship management techniques, while also maintaining the physical demands of farming and coping with his grief over Martha's loss, the financial mystery surrounding Martha's conversion of their assets into gold coins had created additional stress and uncertainty that complicated every business decision Harold needed to make. Without understanding what had happened to nearly $850,000 of their liquid assets, Harold was unable to assess their true financial position or make informed decisions about capital investments, debt management, or long-term planning that required accurate knowledge of their resources and capabilities. The missing money had forced Harold to adopt a conservative approach to farm management that prioritized preserving their remaining assets over pursuing growth opportunities or making improvements that might enhance their operations' efficiency and profitability. He had postponed equipment purchases, delayed facility maintenance projects, and reduced his breeding herd size to minimize expenses and ensure that he could meet his financial obligations without risking the farm's viability. These cost-cutting measures had been emotionally difficult for Harold, who understood that they represented a retreat from the standards of excellence and continuous improvement that he and Martha had maintained throughout their farming careers. The reduced herd size meant fewer opportunities to showcase his breeding expertise and genetic improvement programs, while the deferred maintenance and equipment purchases created operational inefficiencies that affected both productivity and his satisfaction with the quality of his work. Harold's customer relationships had also suffered due to his limited experience with the sales and marketing activities that Martha had managed so successfully. Several restaurant and specialty meat retail customers had expressed concerns about communication delays, order fulfillment issues, and the general uncertainty about whether Bess Family Farm would continue to provide the consistent quality and reliable service that had made them preferred suppliers for premium pork products. Harold's daily routine had become a carefully structured sequence of activities designed to maintain the farm's basic operations while providing him with enough familiar tasks and responsibilities to get through each day without being overwhelmed by grief or the magnitude of the challenges he faced. The routine was both a source of stability and a reminder of how dramatically his life had changed since Martha's death. He woke every morning at 5 a.m. It's 30 minutes earlier than he had risen when Martha was alive, using the extra time for coffee and mental preparation for another day of managing responsibilities that had once been shared with his beloved partner. The farmhouse kitchen, which had been the warm heart of their home when Martha's cooking and conversation filled it with life and purpose, had become a utilitarian space where Harold prepared simple meals and reviewed the day's necessary tasks. The morning livestock feeding routine provided Harold with his most reliable source of satisfaction and connection to the work that had defined his adult life, checking on the health and welfare of his pigs, ensuring that feeding systems were functioning properly, and monitoring breeding programs for signs of success or problems. Requiring attention gave him a sense of purpose and competence that helped him feel connected to the expertise and dedication that had made their farm successful. But even these familiar activities were colored by reminders of Martha's absence. Every pen, every piece of equipment, and every animal on the farm carried memories of conversations they had shared, decisions they had made together, plans they had developed for improvements and innovations that would never be implemented. Because Harold no longer had the financial resources or emotional energy to pursue ambitious projects, Rosie's presence during these morning routines had become both a comfort and a source of additional concern for Harold. The remarkable pig had been Martha's special project and closest animal companion, and her obvious grief over Martha's death had been heartbreaking to witness. Harold had worried that Rosie might decline rapidly without Martha's daily attention and interaction. But the pig had proven to be resilient and had adapted to Harold's different style of care and attention. However, Rosie's morning ritual of precisely timed digging behind the barn had become a daily reminder of the mysteries and unresolved questions that continued to complicate Harold's life. Every morning at 7:30 a.m., Harold would watch from the barn as Rosie made her way to the same spot and began her methodical excavation work, digging with focused determination for exactly 23 minutes before returning to her pen for breakfast. The precision and consistency of Rosie's behavior had initially worried Harold, who had consulted with veterinarians about possible health issues or behavioral problems that might require intervention. When medical examinations revealed no physical problems, and behavioral specialists attributed her digging to grief and stress, Harold had decided to allow Rosie to continue her activities as long as they didn't interfere with farm operations or create safety hazards. Over time, Harold had come to find Rosie's digging routine oddly comforting. The predictability of her behavior provided a sense of stability and continuity in a life that had been disrupted by loss and uncertainty. And watching Rosie's determined work gave Harold something to focus on during the difficult morning hours, when his grief was often most intense. He had begun timing his own morning activities around Rosie's schedule, using her 23-minute digging sessions to complete barn maintenance tasks that required his concentrated attention. The residents of Cedar Hollow had responded to Harold's situation with the kind of practical compassion and determined support that rural communities provide for neighbors facing overwhelming challenges. The response had been coordinated informally through the networks of relationships that connected farming families, local businesses, and community organizations, creating a comprehensive support system that addressed both Harold's immediate needs and his long-term concerns about maintaining his farm and his place in the community. Murphy's General Store had become the unofficial coordination center for community assistance to Harold, with owner Patrick Murphy maintaining a mental catalog of Harold's needs and matching them with neighbors who had resources, time, or expertise to offer when Harold needed help with equipment repairs that exceeded his capabilities. Murphy would mention the situation to customers who had relevant skills and who could be counted on to volunteer their assistance without making Harold feel like he was accepting charity. The system worked because Murphy understood Harold's pride and his reluctance to ask for help directly, and because the community respected Harold's need to maintain his independence and dignity, while acknowledging that he was struggling with challenges that would overwhelm anyone facing them alone. The assistance was always offered as neighborly cooperation rather than charity, and was often structured as exchanges of services or mutual assistance that allowed Harold to contribute his own expertise while receiving help with tasks that exceeded his current capabilities, Father Michael O'Brien at St. Catherine's Catholic Church had become Harold's informal counselor and advocate, checking on him regularly and providing both spiritual support and practical assistance with the administrative and legal challenges that Martha's death had created. Father O'Brien had helped Harold navigate the complexities of estate settlement, insurance claims, and the financial investigations that had consumed so much of Harold's time and emotional energy during his first year of widowhood. The priest's assistance had been particularly valuable because he understood both the practical and emotional aspects of Harold's situation, and because his position in the community allowed him to coordinate assistance from parishioners and other community members without Harold having to ask for help directly or feel obligated to explain his circumstances to everyone who wanted to help. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the veterinarian who served livestock operations throughout Cedar County, had become another crucial source of support for Harold, providing not just professional services for his animals, but also practical advice about farm management and emotional support during the periods when Harold was most discouraged about his ability to maintain his operation without Martha's partnership. Dr. Martinez had extensive experience working with farming families during crisis periods. She understood the unique challenges that faced people who were trying to maintain agricultural operations while coping with personal losses and financial pressures. Her visits to Bess family farm had become opportunities for Harold to discuss his concerns and receive encouragement from someone who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of his situation. The mystery of Martha's missing $847,000 had created a financial crisis that affected every aspect of Harold's farm management and personal planning. Without access to the liquid assets that Martha had converted to gold, Harold was operating with significantly reduced financial flexibility that limited his options for addressing unexpected expenses, capital improvements, or investment opportunities that might improve his farm's profitability and long-term viability. The reduced financial resources had forced Harold to make difficult decisions about herd management that directly contradicted the growth and improvement strategies that he and Martha had pursued throughout their farming careers. He had been forced to sell breeding animals that represented years of genetic improvement work, reducing both his current income potential and his ability to produce high-quality animals that commanded premium prices in specialty markets. Equipment, maintenance, and replacement had become another area where financial constraints were affecting farm operations and Harold's satisfaction with the quality of his work. Several pieces of critical equipment were operating beyond their optimal service lives and would require expensive repairs or replacement that Harold couldn't afford without access to their missing assets or borrowing against farm equity that he was reluctant to risk. The uncertainty about their financial situation had also complicated Harold's ability to plan for the future, or make commitments to customers and suppliers that required long-term reliability and stability. Without knowing whether he would be able to maintain his current operation or might be forced to downsize further or even sell the farm, Harold was reluctant to enter into contracts or make promises that he might not be able to fulfill. Harold had consulted with agricultural economists and farm management specialists about strategies for operating with reduced capital while maintaining productivity and profitability. But the experts had consistently emphasized that his situation required either access to additional capital or significant changes to his operation. Now, that would reduce both its scope and its income potential. The most painful aspect of his financial situation was Harold's growing concern that he might be forced to sell the farm that he and Martha had spent 26 years developing into one of the premier livestock operations in eastern Iowa. The farm represented not just their economic livelihood, but also their shared dreams, their life's work, and Harold's connection to Martha's memory and their life together. Harold's search for Martha's missing gold had become an obsession that consumed countless hours and significant financial resources while providing no answers about what had happened to their life savings. The search had expanded beyond their property to include investigations of Martha's activities during her final months, reviews of their financial records by forensic accountants, and consultations with security experts about potential theft scenarios that might explain the disappearance of such a large amount of money. The forensic accounting investigation had confirmed that Martha had liquidated approximately $850,000 worth of investments and had used the proceeds to purchase gold coins from reputable dealers in Iowa City, Des Moines, and Cedar Rapids. The transactions had been carefully planned and executed over several months, using cash withdrawals that were timed to coincide with normal business expenses and seasonal cash flow patterns that made them less noticeable in their business accounts. But the investigation had found no evidence of what Martha had done with the gold coins after purchasing them. There were no records of sales transactions, no evidence of theft or fraud, and no indication that Martha had shared information about her activities with anyone who might have knowledge about the location of their missing assets. Harold had hired professional investigators to review Martha's activities during her final months, hoping to identify relationships or activities that might provide clues about her intentions or the location where she had concealed their gold. The investigators had interviewed Martha's doctors, her friends, and business associates, but had found no evidence that Martha had discussed her gold purchases or her plans for protecting their assets with anyone who could provide information about their current location. The most extensive searches had focused on their farm property, where Harold had systematically examined every possible hiding place using metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and visual inspections that had covered every building storage area and potential concealment location. The searches had been thorough and professional, conducted by security experts who specialized in locating hidden assets, but had found no evidence of buried or concealed gold anywhere on their property. Harold had even considered the possibility that Martha had stored their gold in off-site locations such as safety deposit boxes, commercial storage facilities, or properties belonging to friends or family members who might not have understood the significance of what they were protecting. But investigations of these possibilities had found no evidence that Martha had arranged off-site storage or had shared her plans with anyone who could provide access to their missing assets. The unsuccessful search efforts had been emotionally exhausting and financially expensive for Harold, requiring him to invest time and resources that he could not afford while maintaining hope that each new search method or investigation technique might finally provide the breakthrough that would solve their financial crisis and allow him to understand Martha's final actions. Throughout Harold's struggles with grief, financial pressures, and the mystery of their missing assets, Rosie had continued her daily digging ritual with unwavering consistency that had become one of the few predictable elements in Harold's disrupted life. The remarkable pig's behavior had evolved beyond simple digging into what could only be described as a methodical excavation project that demonstrated planning, persistence, and purpose that impressed everyone who observed her activities. Rosie's morning and evening digging sessions had become precisely timed routines that Harold could set his watch by. Every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., Rosie would leave her pen and walk directly to the same 3-foot diameter area behind the barn, where she would begin digging with systematic techniques that maximized her efficiency while minimizing wasted effort. Her digging pattern involved careful removal of soil and layers, with periodic pauses to examine the area and assess her progress. After exactly 23 minutes of focused work, Rosie would stop digging and return to her pen for breakfast. Regardless of weather conditions or distractions that might have interrupted other activities, the precision of her timing had amazed Harold and the veterinarians who had observed her behavior, as it demonstrated a level of time awareness and behavioral control that exceeded what was typically expected from even the most intelligent pigs. The evening digging session followed an identical pattern, beginning at exactly 5:15 p.m. and lasting for precisely 23 minutes before Rosie returned to her pen for dinner. The consistency of her schedule had persisted through weather changes, seasonal variations, and the various disruptions to farm routines that had occurred during Harold's adjustment to managing the operation without Martha's assistance. Harold had documented Rosie's behavior with photographs and detailed records that tracked her progress and the changes in the excavation site over time. The hole had gradually expanded to approximately 3 feet in diameter and had reached a depth of nearly 2.5 feet, representing a substantial amount of earth that Rosie had removed through her patient, systematic work. The sophistication of Rosie's digging techniques had impressed animal behavior specialists, who had visited the farm to observe her activities and assess whether her behavior indicated health problems or psychological issues that required intervention. The specialists had noted that Rosie's digging pattern was far more organized and purposeful than typical pig rooting behavior, and that her persistence and consistency suggested strong motivation rather than random or instinctive activities. Word of Rosie's unusual behavior had spread throughout Cedar Hollow and the surrounding agricultural community, attracting visitors who were curious about the pig that dug like she was searching for something specific. The story had been featured in the Cedar County Agricultural newsletter and had been discussed at farming meetings and social gatherings where Rosie's activities had become a source of both amusement and genuine amazement. Children from neighboring farms had begun making special trips to see Rosie's digging sessions, treating her activities as entertainment while also expressing genuine fascination with her intelligence and determination. Parents had used Rosie's behavior as examples of animal intelligence and persistence when teaching their children about the importance of dedication and hard work in achieving goals. Local newspaper reporter Jennifer Walsh had written a feature article about Rosie's digging behavior for the Cedar County Herald, describing her activities as one of the most remarkable examples of animal intelligence and persistence ever documented. In eastern Iowa, the article had attracted attention from animal behavior researchers at Iowa State University, who had contacted Harold about the possibility of studying Rosie's behavior for research projects related to pig cognition and intelligence. Dr. Sarah Chen, an animal behavior specialist from the university, had visited Bess family farm to observe Rosie's digging sessions and had been amazed by the precision and consistency of her activities. Dr. Chen had explained that Rosie's behavior demonstrated cognitive abilities that exceeded current scientific understanding of pig intelligence and had requested permission to conduct formal studies that might advance knowledge about animal cognition and problem-solving capabilities. Harold had agreed to allow limited research activities that wouldn't interfere with Rosie's routine or create stress that might affect her health and well-being. The research had confirmed that Rosie's behavior was highly unusual and suggested intelligence levels that challenged conventional assumptions about pig cognitive abilities, but had not provided explanations for her motivation or the specific objectives that were driving her persistent excavation activities. Despite his rational understanding that Rosie's digging behavior was likely related to grief, stress, or instinctive activities that had no connection to their financial problems, Harold had begun to feel a growing sense of hope that somehow Rosie's activities might be related to Martha's missing gold. The hope was irrational, and Harold understood its emotional rather than logical basis. But he had found himself increasingly invested in Rosie's success and increasingly convinced that her determination and intelligence suggested purposes that he didn't fully understand. The timing of Rosie's behavior had begun approximately 2 weeks after Martha's death, which coincided with the period when Harold had begun his systematic search for their missing assets. Harold had noticed that Rosie seemed particularly interested in areas of the farm where he had conducted extensive searches and had wondered whether the pig might have witnessed activities related to Martha's concealment of their gold. Martha had spent significant time with Rosie during her final months, often sitting beside the pig's pen during the evening hours when she had been managing her secret preparations for protecting their assets. Harold had observed these interactions and had assumed they were part of Martha's routine animal care activities, but he had begun to wonder whether Martha might have shared information or activities with Rosie that could explain the pig's current behavior. The location of Rosie's digging had also begun to seem significant to Harold, as it was in an area of the farm where Martha had spent time during her final weeks and was close to the barn, where she had stored tools and equipment that could have been used for concealing valuable items. Harold had searched the area multiple times using metal detectors and visual inspections, and had not found evidence of buried items or disturbances that might indicate concealment activities. However, Harold's searches had been focused on obvious hiding places and had not included the systematic excavation that would be required to examine areas that had been carefully restored to their original appearance. The possibility that Martha had buried their gold deeper than his metal detectors could penetrate or in locations that required extensive digging to discover had begun to seem increasingly plausible as Harold observed Rosie's methodical approach to excavation. As autumn 2024 progressed and Harold's financial situation continued to deteriorate, his desperation about finding Martha's missing gold had intensified to the point where Rosie's digging behavior had become his primary source of hope and focus. The rational part of Harold's mind understood that expecting a pig to solve his financial crisis was unrealistic. But the emotional part of his mind had embraced the possibility that Rosie might succeed where professional investigators and sophisticated technology had failed. Harold had begun timing his daily activities around Rosie's digging schedule, positioning himself where he could observe her work and assess her progress. He had started bringing tools to the excavation site, ostensibly for farm maintenance activities, but actually to be available if Rosie needed assistance with her digging or if her activities revealed something that required immediate attention. The depth of Harold's hope and desperation had become apparent to community members who had noticed his increased attention to Rosie's activities and his obvious emotional investment in her success. Father O'Brien had gently expressed concern that Harold might be placing unrealistic expectations on Rosie's behavior and had encouraged him to continue pursuing practical solutions to his financial problems rather than relying on possibilities that might not materialize. But Harold had found himself unable to abandon his growing conviction that Rosie was trying to help him solve the mystery of Martha's missing gold. The pig's intelligence, her obvious emotional connection to Martha, and her persistent focus on a specific location had convinced Harold that her behavior was purposeful rather than random, and that she might possess knowledge or abilities that could lead to the discovery he desperately needed. As October 2024 drew to a close, Harold's situation had reached a critical point where he would soon be forced to make irreversible decisions about the future of his farming operation. His reduced financial resources and the ongoing mystery of Martha's missing assets had created a cash flow crisis that threatened his ability to meet mortgage payments, maintain equipment, and purchase the feed and supplies necessary for maintaining his livestock operation. Harold had received preliminary offers from agricultural corporations and development companies that were interested in purchasing his land for purposes ranging from industrial agriculture to residential development. Offers represented fair market value for his property, but they also represented the end of 26 years of dreams, hard work, and shared achievements that had defined his life with Martha. The prospect of selling the farm and leaving the community where he and Martha had built their life together was emotionally devastating for Harold. But his financial situation was approaching the point where selling might be his only option. For avoiding bankruptcy and preserving some portion of the wealth they had accumulated through decades of successful farming, during these final weeks before the discovery that would change everything, Harold had spent increasing amounts of time watching Rosie's digging activities and hoping that somehow, impossibly, Martha's beloved pig would find the treasure that would save their farm and honor the memory of the woman who had loved them both more than her own life. Rosie was just days away from completing her year-long mission to reunite him with the fortune that Martha had hidden. To protect their future, he had no idea that the intelligent, loyal pig had been systematically working toward the moment when she would finally reach the waterproof container that held $847,000 in gold coins and a love letter from Martha that would explain everything and restore Harold's faith in the power of love to transcend even death itself. But Rosie knew. She had always known, and she had never given up on the man who needed her help, even when he didn't understand what she was trying to do for him. On November 3rd, 2024, Rosie would finally break through to the treasure that would transform Harold's life and prove that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of loyalty come from the most unexpected sources, reminding us that love truly knows no boundaries, and that intelligence and devotion can take forms that we rarely recognize but should never underestimate. November 3rd, 2024, dawned crisp and clear in Cedar Hollow, Iowa. Now, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that makes farmers grateful for the land they work and the life they've chosen, Harold Bess woke at his usual 5 a.m., completely unaware that this would be the day when everything he thought he knew about animal intelligence, his late wife's love, and the mysterious pig who had been trying to save his life for nearly a year would be forever transformed by a discovery so extraordinary that it would make headlines around the world and rewrite scientific understanding of animal cognition and loyalty. At 7:25 a.m., Harold was completing his morning livestock feeding routine when he noticed something different about Rosie's behavior. The remarkable Hampshire sow was already at her digging site behind the barn, 5 minutes earlier than her usual precisely timed 7:30 a.m. schedule, and her body language suggested an unusual level of excitement and focus that Harold had never observed during her previous excavation sessions. Rosie was moving around the perimeter of her hole with obvious agitation, sniffing the air and making soft vocalizations that seemed to indicate she was close to achieving whatever goal had been driving her systematic digging for the past 11 months. Her tail was wagging with the kind of excited energy that Harold had only seen when Martha was approaching with special treats, or something particularly interesting was happening that captured Rosie's complete attention. Harold found himself drawn to observe Rosie's activities more closely than usual, positioning himself near the barn where he could watch her work, while remaining far enough away to avoid interfering with her routine. Something about Rosie's behavior suggested that this morning was going to be different, and Harold felt a growing sense of anticipation that he couldn't explain rationally, but couldn't ignore emotionally. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Rosie began her digging, with an intensity and focus that exceeded anything Harold had witnessed during her previous sessions. Instead of her usual methodical, measured approach to excavation, Rosie was digging with obvious urgency and excitement, as if she knew she was close to finding whatever had been motivating her year-long project. Harold watched in amazement as Rosie's powerful snout and front hooves worked through the soil with remarkable efficiency, removing dirt and debris at a rate that far exceeded her typical pace. Her breathing was heavy with exertion, but her determination was unwavering, and she paused only briefly to examine her progress before returning to her excavation work with renewed energy. 10 minutes into her session, Rosie's behavior changed dramatically. She stopped digging and began vocalizing with excited grunts and squeals that Harold had never heard before, sounds that seemed to indicate discovery rather than frustration or effort. She was pawing at something in the bottom of her hole, something that was creating a different sound than the soft earth she had been excavating for months. Harold's heart began racing as he realized that Rosie had found something solid at the bottom of her excavation site, against his better judgment, but driven by curiosity and desperate hope. Harold approached the hole where Rosie was working and peered down to see what had captured her attention so completely. What he saw changed everything. At the bottom of Rosie's carefully excavated hole, partially exposed and covered with dirt, was the corner of what appeared to be a waterproof storage container, exactly the type of container that would be used to protect valuable items from moisture and environmental damage during long-term underground storage. Harold's hands were shaking as he knelt beside the hole and began carefully clearing away the soil that Rosie had loosened around the container. As more of the container became visible, Harold could see that it was a high-quality waterproof case, approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep, large enough to hold substantial valuable items and sophisticated enough to protect them from environmental damage for extended periods. Rosie seemed to understand that Harold had taken over the excavation process, and she stepped back from the hole while maintaining close observation of his activities. Her body language suggested satisfaction and excitement, as if she had accomplished exactly what she had been trying to achieve and was now waiting for Harold to complete the discovery process that she had initiated. Working carefully to avoid damaging whatever was inside the container, Harold cleared away the remaining soil and lifted the waterproof case from its underground hiding place. The container was heavier than he had expected, suggesting that it contained substantial contents, and it showed no signs of damage or deterioration despite being buried for nearly a year. Harold's heart was pounding as he carried the container to his workbench in the barn, with Rosie following closely behind as if she wanted to witness the opening of the treasure that she had worked so hard to help him discover. The moment felt surreal and impossible. But the weight of the container in his hands and Rosie's obvious satisfaction confirmed that this was actually happening. With trembling fingers, Harold opened the latches of the waterproof container and lifted the lid, to reveal contents that took his breath away and brought tears to his eyes. The container was filled with gold coins, American eagles, Canadian maple leafs, and other internationally recognized gold pieces that represented the missing 847,000 that had consumed Harold's thoughts and fears for nearly 2 years. But the gold coins were just the beginning of Martha's final gift to her beloved husband. Beneath the carefully arranged layers of gold, Harold found a waterproof document pouch containing a letter written in Martha's familiar handwriting, along with detailed documentation about her gold purchases, storage decisions, and the medical diagnosis that had motivated her desperate attempts to protect their financial future. Harold's hands were shaking so badly that he could barely open Martha's letter, but when he finally managed to unfold the pages and read her words, he understood everything, not just about the missing money, but about Martha's final months, her secret struggle with heart disease, and her extraordinary plan to ensure that their farm and their future would be protected even if her health problems proved fatal. My dearest Harold, if you are reading this letter, it means that my heart has given out before. I had the courage to tell you about my diagnosis and the preparations I've made to protect our future together. I know you will be angry with me for keeping secrets, and I know you will be heartbroken that I didn't trust you enough to share my fears and my plans. Please forgive me for choosing protection over honesty, and please understand that everything I did was motivated by my love for you and my determination to ensure that you could continue farming and living the life we built together, even if I couldn't be there to share it with you. Dr. Chen diagnosed me with severe ischemic coronary artery disease in March 2023. The condition requires immediate surgery and extensive lifestyle changes that would make it impossible for me to continue my role in managing our farm. Worse, the medical expenses and my inability to contribute to our income would create financial pressures that could force us to sell the farm that represents everything we've accomplished together. I couldn't bear the thought that my health problems might destroy your dreams and your livelihood, so I developed a plan to convert our vulnerable financial assets into gold that could be hidden safely and accessed quickly if our situation became desperate. The $847,000 in this container represents our insurance policy against bankruptcy, medical expenses, and any other challenges that might threaten our farm and our future. I chose to bury our treasure in the spot where Rosie likes to root and dig because I knew she would remember the location and might even try to help you find it. Something happened to me before I could share my secret. Rosie is far more intelligent than most people realize, and her bond with both of us is deeper than anyone understands. I trusted her to guard our secret and to help you when you needed her most. Harold, please don't blame yourself for not noticing my health problems or my secret activities. I worked very hard to hide my condition and my plans because I wanted to protect you from worry and fear for as long as possible. I hoped that my surgery would be successful and that I would have many years to gradually reveal my preparations and help you understand why I made these decisions without consulting you. Use this money to save our farm, to continue the work that has given our lives meaning and purpose, and to honor the dreams we shared during our 26 wonderful years together. The farm is our legacy, and your continued success as a farmer is the greatest tribute you can give to our love and our life together. Take care of Rosie. She has been my closest companion during these difficult months, and she understands more about love and loyalty than most humans ever will. If she helped you find this treasure, it means she kept her promise to watch over you and protect what we built together. I love you more than words can express, and I will be watching over you and our farm forever. Your devoted wife, Martha. P.S. There are additional documents in this container that explain my medical situation, my gold purchases, and legal instructions for managing our assets. Please share this information with Father O'Brien and our attorney so they can help you with any technical or legal requirements for protecting our wealth and our farm. Harold read Martha's letter 3 times before the full impact of her words, and her sacrifice began to penetrate his grief and amazement. His beloved wife had spent her final months not just battling a fatal heart condition, but also working to protect him and their farm from the financial devastation that her medical crisis could have created. Martha had known she was dying, and instead of seeking comfort and support from her husband, she had chosen to shoulder the burden alone, while secretly arranging protections that would allow Harold to continue their shared life's work even after she was gone. The courage and selflessness required for such a decision were almost incomprehensible, and Harold was overwhelmed by admiration for the woman he had loved and lost. But perhaps most amazing was Martha's faith in Rosie's intelligence and loyalty. Martha had trusted their remarkable pig to remember the location of their buried treasure and to somehow communicate its importance to Harold when he needed help most. The trust had been justified. Rosie had spent 11 months working systematically to excavate the exact location where Martha had hidden their fortune, demonstrating intelligence, memory, and dedication that exceeded anything Harold had believed possible from any animal. Harold looked at Rosie, who was standing nearby watching his reactions with obvious interest and satisfaction, and realized that he owed his farm, his future, and his understanding of Martha's final gift to a pig who had never given up on helping him solve the mystery that had been destroying his life. The discovery of Martha's treasure through Rosie's systematic excavation work represented more than just a heartwarming story of animal loyalty and human love, provided scientific evidence of pig intelligence and memory capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and interspecies communication. Rosie had witnessed Martha's burial of their gold coins and had retained detailed spatial memory of the location for nearly a year. She had developed and implemented a systematic excavation plan that demonstrated problem-solving abilities, temporal awareness, and goal-directed behavior that exceeded current scientific understanding of pig cognitive capabilities. Most remarkably, Rosie had apparently understood the significance of what she had witnessed and had recognized that Harold needed help finding the treasure that Martha had hidden. Her persistent efforts to excavate the burial site suggested not just memory and intelligence, but empathy and altruistic behavior that indicated emotional connections between species that scientists were only beginning to recognize and study. Dr. Sarah Chen from Iowa State University was contacted immediately about Rosie's extraordinary achievement, and she arrived at Bess Family Farm within hours to document the discovery and begin preliminary studies of Rosie's behavior and capabilities. Dr. Chen's initial assessment confirmed that Rosie's accomplishment was unprecedented in animal behavior research and would require extensive study to understand the cognitive processes and emotional motivations that had enabled such remarkable behavior. At the bottom of Rosie's carefully excavated hole, partially exposed and covered with dirt, was the corner of what appeared to be a waterproof storage container. Exactly the type of container that would be used to protect valuable items from moisture and environmental damage during long-term underground storage. Harold's hands were shaking as he knelt beside the hole and began carefully clearing away the soil that Rosie had loosened around the container. As more of the container became visible, Harold could see that it was a high-quality waterproof case. Approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep, large enough to hold substantial, valuable items, and sophisticated enough to protect them from environmental damage for extended periods. Rosie seemed to understand that Harold had taken over the excavation process, and she stepped back from the hole while maintaining close observation of his activities.
Yes.
Her body language suggested satisfaction and excitement, as if she had accomplished exactly what she had been trying to achieve and was now waiting for Harold to complete the discovery process that she had initiated. Working carefully to avoid damaging whatever was inside the container, Harold cleared away the remaining soil and lifted the waterproof case from its underground hiding place. The container was heavier than he had expected, suggesting that it contained substantial contents, and it showed no signs of damage or deterioration despite being buried for nearly a year. Harold's heart was pounding as he carried the container to his workbench in the barn, with Rosie following closely behind, as if she wanted to witness the opening of the treasure that she had worked so hard to help him discover. The moment felt surreal and impossible. But the weight of the container in his hands and Rosie's obvious satisfaction confirmed that this was actually happening. With trembling fingers, Harold opened the latches of the waterproof container and lifted the lid, to reveal contents that took his breath away and brought tears to his eyes. The container was filled with gold coins, American eagles, Canadian maple leafs, and other internationally recognized gold pieces that represented the missing 847,000 that had consumed Harold's thoughts and fears for nearly 2 years. But the gold coins were just the beginning of Martha's final gift to her beloved husband. Beneath the carefully arranged layers of gold, Harold found a waterproof document pouch containing a letter written in Martha's familiar handwriting, along with detailed documentation about her gold purchases, storage decisions, and the medical diagnosis that had motivated her desperate attempts to protect their financial future. Harold's hands were shaking so badly that he could barely open Martha's letter. But when he finally managed to unfold the pages and read her words, he understood everything, not just about the missing money, but about Martha's final months, her secret struggle with heart disease, and her extraordinary plan to ensure that their farm and their future would be protected even if her health problems proved fatal. My dearest Harold, if you are reading this letter, it means that my heart has given out before. I had the courage to tell you about my diagnosis and the preparations I've made to protect our future together. Know you'll be angry with me for keeping secrets, and I know you will be heartbroken that I didn't trust you enough to share my fears and my plans. Please forgive me for choosing protection over honesty, and please understand that everything I did was motivated by my love for you and my determination to ensure that you could continue farming and living the life we built together, even if I couldn't be there to share it with you. Dr. Chen diagnosed me with severe coronary artery disease in March 2023. The condition requires immediate surgery and extensive lifestyle changes that would make it impossible for me to continue my role in managing our farm. Worse, the medical expenses and my inability to contribute to our income would create financial pressures that could force us to sell the farm. That represents everything we've accomplished together. I couldn't bear the thought that my health problems might destroy your dreams and your livelihood, so I developed a plan to convert our vulnerable financial assets into gold that could be hidden safely and accessed quickly if our situation became desperate. The $847,000 in this container represents our insurance policy against bankruptcy, medical expenses, and any other challenges that might threaten our farm and our future. I chose to bury our treasure in the spot where Rosie likes to root and dig because I knew she would remember the location and might even try to help you find it. If something happened to me before I could share my secret, Rosie is far more intelligent than most people realize, and her bond with both of us is deeper than anyone understands. I trusted her to guard our secret and to help you when you needed her most. Harold, please don't blame yourself for not noticing my health problems or my secret activities. I worked very hard to hide my condition and my plans because I wanted to protect you from worry and fear for as long as possible. I hoped that my surgery would be successful and that I would have many years to gradually reveal my preparations and help you understand why I made these decisions without consulting you. Use this money to save our farm, to continue the work that has given our lives meaning and purpose, and to honor the dreams we shared during our 26 wonderful years together. The farm is our legacy, and your continued success as a farmer is the greatest tribute you can give to our love and our life together. Take care of Rosie. She has been my closest companion during these difficult months, and she understands more about love and loyalty than most humans ever will. If she helped you find this treasure, it means she kept her promise to watch over you and protect what we built together. I love you more than words can express, and I will be watching over you and our farm forever. Your devoted wife, Martha. P.S. There are additional documents in this container that explain my medical situation, my gold purchases, and legal instructions for managing our assets. Please share this information with Father O'Brien and our attorney so they can help you with any technical or legal requirements for protecting our wealth and our farm. Harold read Martha's letter 3 times before the full impact of her words, and her sacrifice began to penetrate his grief and amazement. His beloved wife had spent her final months not just battling a fatal heart condition, but also working to protect him and their farm from the financial devastation that her medical crisis could have created. Martha had known she was dying, and instead of seeking comfort and support from her husband, she had chosen to shoulder the burden alone, while secretly arranging protections that would allow Harold to continue their shared life's work even after she was gone. The courage and selflessness required for such a decision were almost incomprehensible, and Harold was overwhelmed by admiration for the woman he had loved and lost. But perhaps most amazing was Martha's faith in Rosie's intelligence and loyalty. Martha had trusted their remarkable pig to remember the location of their buried treasure and to somehow communicate its importance to Harold when he needed help most. The trust had been justified. Rosie had spent 11 months working systematically to excavate the exact location where Martha had hidden their fortune, demonstrating intelligence, memory, and dedication that exceeded anything Harold had believed possible from any animal. Harold looked at Rosie, who was standing nearby watching his reactions with obvious interest and satisfaction, and realized that he owed his farm, his future, and his understanding of Martha's final gift to a pig who had never given up on helping him solve the mystery that had been destroying his life. The discovery of Martha's treasure through Rosie's systematic excavation work represented more than just a heartwarming story of animal loyalty and human love, provided scientific evidence of pig intelligence and memory capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and interspecies communication. Rosie had witnessed Martha's burial of their gold coins and had retained detailed spatial memory of the location for nearly a year. She had developed and implemented a systematic excavation plan that demonstrated problem-solving abilities, temporal awareness, and goal-directed behavior that exceeded current scientific understanding of pig cognitive capabilities. Most remarkably, Rosie had apparently understood the significance of what she had witnessed and had recognized that Harold needed help finding the treasure that Martha had hidden. Her persistent efforts to excavate the burial site suggested not just memory and intelligence, but empathy and altruistic behavior that indicated emotional connections between species that scientists were only beginning to recognize and study. Dr. Sarah Chen from Iowa State University was contacted immediately about Rosie's extraordinary achievement, and she arrived at Bess family farm within hours to document the discovery and begin preliminary studies of Rosie's behavior and capabilities. Dr. Chen's initial assessment confirmed that Rosie's accomplishment was unprecedented in animal behavior research and would require extensive study to understand the cognitive processes and emotional motivations that had enabled such remarkable behavior. Word of Harold's discovery spread through Cedar Hollow within hours, creating excitement and amazement that drew neighbors, friends, and community members to Bess family farm to witness the sight of one of the most extraordinary animal achievements ever documented. The story seemed almost too incredible to believe. But the evidence was undeniable. Martha's treasure, Rosie's excavated hole, and Harold's transformation from desperate widower to financially secure farmer confirmed every detail of the impossible tale. Patrick Murphy from the general store was among the first neighbors to arrive at the farm, bringing coffee and congratulations while marveling at the intelligence and loyalty that Rosie had demonstrated through her year-long effort to help Harold. "I always knew Rosie was special," Murphy told reporters who quickly arrived to cover the story. "But this proves that we don't understand animal intelligence nearly as well as we think we do." Father O'Brien arrived to provide emotional support for Harold and to help him process the spiritual and emotional implications of Martha's final gift and Rosie's extraordinary assistance. The priest was amazed by the depth of love and planning that Martha had demonstrated, and by the evidence of animal intelligence and loyalty that challenged traditional understanding of God's creation and the connections between different species. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the veterinarian who had been caring for Rosie throughout her digging period, was astounded by the revelation that the pig's behavior had been purposeful rather than stress-related. "In 30 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Martinez explained to local television reporters. Rosie understood what Martha had done, remembered the location for nearly a year, and worked systematically to help Harold when he needed her most. This changes everything. We thought we knew about animal cognition and emotional intelligence. Within 24 hours of Harold's discovery, the story of Rosie's treasure hunt had become national news, attracting media attention from major television networks, newspapers, and online platforms that recognized the story's unique combination of human interest, scientific significance, and emotional impact. The tale had everything that captured public imagination: love, mystery, animal intelligence, and a happy ending that restored faith in loyalty and dedication. CNN, NBC, CBS, and other major networks sent crews to Cedar Hollow to interview Harold, document Rosie's excavation site, and explore the scientific implications of her achievement. The story was featured on morning talk shows, evening news programs, and documentary specials that examined the broader questions about animal intelligence and interspecies relationships that Rosie's behavior had raised. Animal Planet commissioned a feature documentary about Rosie's story, working with Dr. Chen and other researchers to explore the scientific significance of her achievement while celebrating the emotional bonds between Harold, Martha, and their remarkable pig. The documentary would eventually win multiple awards and become one of the most watched animal intelligence programs in television history. The Today Show featured Harold and Rosie in a segment that drew over 12 million viewers and generated thousands of emails from people sharing their own stories of extraordinary animal intelligence and loyalty. The response demonstrated that Rosie's achievement had touched something fundamental about human relationships with animals and had provided hope and inspiration to people facing their own challenges with loss, love, and the search for meaning. In difficult circumstances, Dr. Chen's research into Rosie's cognitive capabilities attracted funding and collaboration from researchers around the world who wanted to understand the mechanisms that had enabled such extraordinary behavior. The studies revealed that Rosie's achievement involved multiple complex cognitive processes, including spatial memory, temporal awareness, problem-solving, and what appeared to be empathetic understanding of Harold's emotional needs. Brain imaging. Studies conducted at Iowa State University showed that Rosie's brain activity patterns were unlike anything previously documented in pig cognition research. Her hippocampus, the brain region associated with memory formation and spatial navigation, showed unusual development and activity levels that might explain her exceptional memory capabilities and spatial intelligence. Most intriguing were the neurological pathways associated with emotional processing and social cognition, which suggested that Rosie's behavior had been motivated not just by memory and intelligence, but by emotional connections and empathetic responses that indicated sophisticated understanding of human emotional states and needs. The research findings were published in multiple scientific journals and presented at conferences around the world, establishing Rosie as one of the most studied and celebrated animals in cognitive science research. Her achievement became a cornerstone case study for understanding animal intelligence and the emotional bonds that connect different species in ways that science was only beginning to recognize and appreciate. Harold's life was transformed not just by the discovery of Martha's hidden treasure, but by his new understanding of the love that had motivated her secret preparations and the loyalty that had driven Rosie's year-long effort to help him. The financial security provided by the gold coins ensured that he could maintain their farm and continue the work that had given his life meaning and purpose. But the emotional impact of the discovery was even more significant. Harold finally understood that Martha's final months had been spent not just battling her illness, but working to protect everything they had built together. Her secret planning and financial preparations had been acts of love that transcended her own fear and pain, demonstrating a depth of devotion and sacrifice that honored their 26 years of marriage and partnership. Rosie's achievement had proven that intelligence, loyalty, and love could take forms that humans rarely recognized but should never underestimate. The remarkable pig had spent 11 months working to solve a problem that had consumed Harold's life and threatened his future, demonstrating capabilities and motivations that challenged everything Harold had believed about animal consciousness and emotional intelligence. The Rosie discovery, as it became known in scientific literature, established new standards for understanding animal cognition and interspecies relationships. Rosie's achievement proved that animals could possess spatial memory, problem-solving abilities, and emotional intelligence that far exceeded previous scientific assumptions, opening new areas of research and challenging traditional boundaries between human and animal consciousness. The story inspired legislation protecting animal welfare and funding for animal intelligence research. As lawmakers and scientists recognized that Rosie's achievement demonstrated capabilities that required new approaches to understanding and protecting animal rights and welfare, the Rosie Foundation was established to fund research into animal cognition and to support farming families facing medical and financial crises. Similar to those that had affected Harold and Martha, Bess' family farm became a destination for researchers, students, and visitors who wanted to learn about animal intelligence and see the site, where one of the most extraordinary examples of animal loyalty and problem-solving had been documented. Harold continued farming while also serving as an advocate for animal welfare and intelligence research, sharing Rosie's story with audiences around the world who were inspired by the proof that love and loyalty could transcend species boundaries. Rosie's story became a symbol of the hidden intelligence and emotional depth that exists throughout the animal kingdom, reminding humans that consciousness, love, and loyalty are not exclusively human characteristics, but are shared by many species, in ways that we are only beginning to understand and appreciate. The tale provided hope and inspiration for people facing loss, financial crisis, and seemingly impossible challenges, by demonstrating that help and solutions can come from the most unexpected sources if we remain open to possibilities that exceed our current understanding of the world around us. Most importantly, Rosie's achievement honored Martha's memory by proving that her faith in the pig's intelligence and loyalty had been justified, and that love truly knows no boundaries when it is expressed through actions that prioritize the welfare of others above personal comfort and safety. As Harold would tell visitors who came to learn about Rosie's extraordinary achievement, Martha always said that Rosie was special, but none of us understood just how special until she spent a year trying to save our farm and our future. This story taught me that intelligence and love take many forms, and that sometimes the most important answers come from those who can't speak but refuse to give up on the people they care about. The farmer who had thought his pig was just being stubborn had discovered that she was actually being heroic. The treasure that had been missing all along wasn't just the gold coins buried behind the barnet, was the love, intelligence, and loyalty that connected Harold, Martha, and Rosie in ways that transcended species, death, and human understanding. Rosie had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of devotion come from the most ordinary circumstances, and that the greatest treasures are often buried not in the ground, but in the hearts of those who love us enough to never give up, no matter how long it takes or how impossible the task might seem. In the end, Harold had found much more than Martha's hidden gold. He had discovered the depth of love that connects all living beings and the proof that intelligence, loyalty, and devotion are universal languages that speak louder than words and last longer than life itself. And every morning at 7:30 a.m., Harold would visit the spot where Rosie had worked so patiently to change his life, remembering the pig who had taught him that love truly knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most important treasures are the ones we never knew we were looking for until someone extraordinary shows us exactly where to find them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.